I adore creating and knitting blankets, so I decided to design a new one just for us. In this series, I'm going to show you how to make your own, from the yarn to the stitches. Join me as we knit through the seasons to create my favourite blanket. Welcome everybody to my favourite blanket. I am so thrilled to be back with you again. Thank you all so much for the fantastic response to our first episode of my favourite blanket, and there's been so many blankets being cast on. I'm just absolutely thrilled. Lots of you have dyed up the honeysuckle colours in the yarn like I had. Some of you have gone into your stash and got similar colours, or you've just chosen whatever you want. So I'm back here with you today to let you know what the flower is that I've chosen for February. Oh, I'm so excited for this one. So I have gone for a heather, and it's a winter flowering heather. And the one in particular that I've gone for is one that's called Wintersonne. Winter and then S-O-N-N-E, all one word, which means Wintersonne, and it's the most gorgeous coloured flower. It's a bright magenta with like a darker purple right at the very end. The leaves and the sort of foliage in the leaves are a sort of bronzy colour, absolutely gorgeous. What I've done is I've sort of looked at a close-up of the flower, because it's a teeny tiny flower. I mean, normally with heathers you see them as like a carpet, don't you, everywhere, and you just get that overall colour. But when you look at them really closely, the flower is just beautiful. It's bright magenta and sort of turning slightly coral. I don't know if that comes in at the end when the flower is sort of dying back, or if it comes in at the beginning. But there's also, certainly in the photo I found, a sort of coral colour going on as well. So we're going to use magenta, we're going to use coral, we've also got some bronze going on in there. It's going to be really fun. So we need to get out of this chilly weather, get cosy indoors and start dyeing our yarn. Okay, so what are we going to need to dye up our gorgeous heather coloured yarn? So same as before, apart from the dyes, but I'll go over everything. So we've got in this bowl, I've got soaking already my yarn, and as I did before, what I'm going to do is I'm dyeing up 50 gram skeins, because we need a 50 gram skein in each of the colours, but I'm going to dye up 2 50 gram skeins in each of the 2 colours, just so that those who can't get 50 gram skeins, if you're dyeing up 100 gram skein, then you're going to do exactly the same thing. With the quantities and everything are the same, because I've got 100 grams of each, even though mine are split into 50 gram skeins. So I've got 4 50 gram skeins here, fingering weight yarn. The base I'm using will be the same the whole way through the blanket. Mine is an 85-15, so that's superwash, merino and nylon, and I've got 200 meters per 50 grams. So you can use whatever base you want. You don't have to use the same base as me. As long as it's fingering weight, you're good to go. I mean, you could even, if you wanted to, if you're pulling from your stash, don't worry if they're different bases each time. Really won't make any difference in the grand scheme of the blanket. As long as it's fingering weight, then you're good to go. So that is soaking in some warm water and some citric acid. Citric acid is my mordant, so the mordant is the substance that makes the dye permanently fixed to the yarn, and I use citric acid. So I've got about a scoop, which a scoop I think is about a tablespoon or so into the water, yarn in, and that's been soaking about half an hour or so. I've got 2 pans. These are what I like to dye in. So I've got 2 of these because we've got 2 colourways. I've got my mask, of course. Something to protect my work surface, so I've got a bit of leftover oilcloth. I've also got some tea towels over there. I've got my trusty big spoon, can't do anything without my big spoon. And then gloves. I've got 2 different pairs of gloves here. I don't like wearing gloves, generally as a rule. I don't like wearing gloves, but I found that the sort of thin, these ones are hypoallergenic. I just buy them in boxes of 100, but the thin ones are better for me because I can feel everything rather than the rubber gloves. I do also have thicker rubber gloves, and I'll put those on when I'm dealing with the hot yarn when I get to that stage, but generally I like these thin gloves. And then what else? The dyes, of course, for the colour today. So I've got 5 dye colours. All of them, apart from one, are landscape dyes, and then I've got one which is jacquard. If you can't get landscape, because I know they're not widely available in all countries, I think they're a little bit difficult to get hold of in some countries. They're actually an Australian brand. I get them from a shop called Wingham Woolworks. It's actually based in a village in Rotherham in South Yorkshire, and I'll tell you a little bit of trivia. Me and Dan had our first date in a pub in that village. So that's the landscape, and then I've got one jacquard which is really widely available. So the colours I've got, so the jacquard is purple, and as it says, it's a true purple. And then the landscape dyes, we've got coral, which is a peachy colour, basically. You know, if you imagine coral pink, I think it's sometimes called coral pink, it's that kind of peachy colour. We've then got wild raspberry. Wild raspberry is like a magenta. So if you can't get this one, just go for any dye which you consider to be magenta. Now magenta's a bit of a funny colour. When I was looking up, you know, what colours go into making magenta, it's basically an in-between colour, in between sort of pink and purple. So you use your judgment. If you can't get landscape, you just want something that you would consider to be magenta. So sort of halfway between pink and purple. We've then got red ochre from landscape. This one's like a brick red. So red ochre. And then bronze, also from landscape. Now bronze is another colour which I did some research on, and bronze, if you were mixing it, for example, with watercolours, it's between a brown and a gold. So if you were trying to mix a bronze, you would have a brown and a gold and mix that together on a palette. So that's what bronze is. So if you can't get bronze and you've got brown and you've got gold, then you can put a bit of each of those in and you should be about right. So that's all of our dye colours. We've got everything else ready. Our yarn has soaked, so it's time to get dyeing. Okay, so in my pan I've got not very much water at all, only about maybe an inch or so of water, and there's in there, I've popped in some more citric acid, so about another tablespoon has gone into there, and it's now nice and steamy. It's got to that steamy point. Now someone did ask me what temperature the water should be when you're dyeing. Now I can't answer that question because I've never physically taken the temperature. However, I've said this many times, but I will say it again. I never fully boil the yarn. I don't find it necessary to rolling boil the yarn. I feel that that's quite damaging to the yarn. So the temperature that it should be at to sort of set the yarn is just slightly below boiling. So it's that simmering point, you know, when you've just got sort of bubbles that are popping on the surface, but it's not a rolling boil. At the moment, this is just steamy, so it's just nice and hot. If you put your finger in, you'd have to take it straight back out again. It's that kind of hot. So into here, I'm going to put 2 of my skeins. So this is the first colour that we're dyeing up here. So I'm going to go over, grab them, squidge them out. Someone else commented as well that they were really surprised I was dyeing yarn in a white shirt, and they were a bit kind of horrified. I like to live on the edge, is all I'm saying. So in the yarn goes, and just spread it out. And the water's hot, but you're fine. I'm fine, certainly fine, putting my hands in just to move the yarn around. You know, it's not going to burn you. So there's not very much water in, like we did last time. I'm using sort of a very similar technique to last time. So we've got a nice surface area of yarn there now. And then I'm just going to bring it up, bring the temperature up a little bit, because putting the yarn in will have lowered that water temperature. So just raise your heat a little bit until you start to see, you know, steam coming off it, and then the odd bubble popping on the surface. For this first colour, this is what I've done with this colourway, is I looked at the flower and I've picked out the colours, and I've really concentrated on the flower colour with this. And the flower itself is this beautiful magenta, and then right on the end of the flower you get like a little, I don't know what it is, there's this extra little bit on the end of the flower that looks like it's a really dark purple to the eye. The sort of background colour of the leaves and the foliage and the stems tends to be a sort of reddish bronze. And then also on the photo I found, I don't know if this is when the flowers are coming in or when they're fading out, but there was a peach tone to some of the flowers, so I've picked out that colour as well. So for this sort of main colour, I've got my magenta, I've got my purple, and I've got red ochre, which is like that brick red foliage colour. Okay, so now this dye colour, it's really intense and it's really saturated. So if you've got this one and this is the one that you're using, just be careful with it. And I'm going to do the same as I did last time, because I really love the way that it knit up into the blanket. So for this one, I'm not going to do this every time, but for this one I'm staying with the same kind of method I did last time. So get some dye on your brush and just choose an area and do a little bit of speckling. It's a gorgeous colour, this. Can you see how lovely that pinky magenta-y colour is? Okay, and then a bit more, find another area. And just repeat that, because we can always go back and add a bit more if we think it's not pink enough or there's not enough dye there. And then I'm going to go right over here and do the tops of the skeins, just a little bit there, look. Now, do I think there's enough dye there? Do you know what? I'm going to just intensify it a little bit. I'm going to go back over, because I really want to see, when I'm knitting, I really want to see these bright pops of magenta. It's better to go gentle and add more than, you know, dollop in a great big lump and think, oh, that's a bit much. Okay, that looks good. So now I'm going to go to my purple, and I'm going to go on top of my magenta and just add a bit of depth with the purple. So this is like the end of the flower. If you look at the photo, you'll see this dark end to it. So just in the centre with your purple, pop some on, and you can sort of scatter it around a little bit if you want, but we want to maintain that magenta as well, so just a little bit. And if you want to, you can find a little area and just put on a bit of purple, just for a bit of fun. There, look, a bit there, a bit there, maybe a bit there, and then you'll get, when we're knitting it up, you'll have an area where you just get that purple, and that's fun too. So now I'm going to my red ochre, and I'm going to go for the areas that don't have any colour and just pop on some red ochre. And this is a great colour, because as it sort of dissipates around a little bit, it does have some sort of peachy tones in there. So that kind of, it picks up on the sort of foliage colour, that reddish brownish, but also the sort of peachy nature of the flowers too. So I'm just choosing areas and popping on some of the red ochre. Red ochre as well always makes me think of Ayla. Anybody who's read Clan of the Cave Bear, red ochre, the pigment, is sacred and they use it in sacred ceremonies. Okay, so now we need to just leave that be. Don't touch it, don't do anything with it. I'm going to put my heat back on. Just give it, you know, a few minutes. If you want it up to 5 minutes, probably would be perfect, I would say. And then we'll come back and we'll check it because we just want to make sure those dyes are fixed. Now what will happen, although at the moment we've got lots of white areas, you will find that the dye will sort of gradually move out. Some of it will move out and we will get a gentle sort of pinkish tone, pinkish purplish peachish tone to the background colour. But for the moment, just leave that be and we'll come back in 5 minutes. Okay, so that's had 5 minutes now, and the way that you can check just to make sure we've got a good set of dyes, to take your big spoon and just find an area of colour and just sort of go in and get a bit of water and drop it down. Can you see how that water's clear? And go into another area. Very, very slightly pink. But that's fine. We don't mind if the background of the yarn dyes, you know, slightly a bit of all of the colours, that's fine. So now we're going to move the skein. So pick it up, and at this point you can kind of have a look at all of those gorgeous speckles. Oh, look at that. It's going to be so fun to knit this, you know, when you get one of those little dark areas. That's going to be so lovely, and the colours are really reminiscent of the flower, I feel. So now we're just going to rearrange the skein, and at the same time, so I'm going to move it a little bit like that, move it a little bit, and at the same time I'm going to sort of flip it over like that so that we get a good amount of dye on both sides of the yarn. So now drop it back down, and what we want is to expose areas that haven't been touched with the dye. So we've got a nice amount of white here, look, and at the top there, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to have a look down here. I think we did get a good amount of dye on that first layer actually, which is good. I think we're good to go there. I'm keeping my temperature at that just simmering point, so if you need to sort of turn your heat on and off, that's what I generally do because I don't want it to boil. So we're going to repeat what we did before, probably not quite as much as I did before because that first layer has had a good covering, but just repeat what you did. So first of all, the highly dangerous wild raspberry that I treat very gently. So go in and just find an area, and the purple colour as well, you'll probably find if you're using the jacquard purple, it does break a little bit, and what I mean by that, if you don't understand that term, is because all pigments, all dye colours, generally they're made up of several different colours all combined, and when you drop them onto the yarn it can break back up into those original colours, and the purple I find does break and you will get some little bits of blue. It all adds to the fun, I think, of it, and I can see some areas where I've got a tiny bit of blue, but I think that's just lovely. Okay, back to my purple, and just as we did before, a little bit on top of the pink, and this just, it sort of intensifies the pink somehow, I find this. And you know, if you want to find a little area, pop a bit of just pure purple on, and then the red ochre, my Ayla colour, just find a little naked area and drop a bit on. Okay, so oops, pop your heat back on if you turned it off like I did. That's the dyeing done for this colourway. It's looking gorgeous. So just leave it again for 5 minutes, and then once your temperature is up and you start to see that movement in the yarn and you've got steam coming off, not that rolling boil, because also if you rolling boil it, we're going to disturb all of those dyes that we want to sort of set there with the speckles. So I can see can you see the movement here? Just turn it down. And I'm going to let it sort of not cook away, that's the wrong word, but just let it sort of simmer away there for 5 minutes or so, and then turn off the heat, pop it outside to cool. Okay, so here we are now for our second colour. Now this one is going to be a tonal but with some variegation in there. Quite a sort of gentle colour. So in my pot it's about half full, I would say, with water, and we've got another tablespoon of citric acid in there. So into the pot I'm going to put in first of all some of the coral colour. This one is much more granular than the raspberry. I don't know if you can see. Can you see how granular it is? And I really love landscape for that sort of quality. Some of them are very granular. So I'm going to pop into my pot. I'm going to start off with a sort of flat 1/8 of a teaspoon. Pop that in. And then I'm going to put in just a teeny bit of the wild raspberry, and I'll put it in. Can you see it literally is a teeny bit? The reason I'm doing that is it gives a kind of connection to the main skein, because we've got that colour going on in the, I say main skein, in the first skein. So give this a stir. Yeah, that looks good. So the colour that you're going to get, coral is, as it says, it's that kind of slightly tangerine-y sort of colour, with pink in there as well. I'm sure there is pink in the coral colour. But adding that tiny bit of wild raspberry just gives it a very teeny bit of a pink edge. And what we're going to do, similar to last time, but I'm going to do it in a more exaggerated way, I'm going to drop the skeins in and let the first half of the skein really absorb the colour, and there will be very little in the kind of second half of the skein, because then we're going to add in a different colour to sort of colour that end, and then where they meet there'll be a kind of bit of mingling going on. And I can use this technique freely with these yarns. I mean, normally I would avoid doing this kind of a thing because I don't like pooling to happen, but the joy of this is that I've got much more freedom, I feel like, anyway, because we're dyeing this for the blanket, which at the moment is all increases. That's going to vary where the yarn lands each time, so we don't need to worry so much about the pooling. So I'm going to grab my remaining 2 skeins here, squidge them out, and then I'm going to drop them in, get my big spoon and drop them in slowly. I'm going to check the colour, that looks good. So drop them in and let that bottom bit get the most dye, and then sort of slowly drop it in. And by the time we get to the centre point, we want the dye in the pot to have kind of dispersed quite a lot, being absorbed in. Oh, it's a gorgeous colour, this. So now we're sort of halfway. So I'm going to move it around. If you move it around, it absorbs the dye really quick. There's very little left in the pot now, look. Can you see? So now I'm just going to drop that in. So at the moment it kind of looks very much like I've only dyed half of the skein, but that is what I want. And that dye colour has all been absorbed now. If I lift it up, look, can you see? The water is clear, and we've got a sort of 2-tone yarn going on here. It's very gentle colour here, not really anything up here. So what I'm going to do now is remove this yarn, squidge it out, pop it back in my bowl, which is now free of any water. But now what we're going to do is drop in some of that bronze. So I'm just going to go in with a little bit initially and see what colour we get in the water. It's about 1/4 of an 1/8 there. Let's just see how intense it is. First of all, oh, it's a gorgeous colour. Yeah, I'm going to need a bit more than that. Oh, look at that. I'm definitely going to need more. I'll put in another quarter, so at the moment that would have been about 1/8 a teaspoon. And let's see, I'm even going to go a bit more. I'm going in increments of a quarter. So that now is probably about a flat 1/8. I'm going to go a teeny bit more and then we'll be there. So I still think it will be about a flat 1/8 actually, of a teaspoon. Yeah, I'm liking the way that looks. It's a gorgeous sort of caramel colour. So make sure it's fully dissolved. So I'm going to go back to my skein now and I'm going to rearrange it so that my ties are down here at the opposite end. So just grab it and move it entirely around like that. Grab it, move it entirely around. So you can see now, oh, it's so pretty. You can see, you can see now we're the other way around. So it's this part of the skein is going to get that lovely bronze colour. So move over, get your big spoon and start dropping it in. Yeah, it's a very gentle colour, but I think it's just going to be perfect. So drop it in, move it around, let it have a little swim around to get some of that colour on. And we're getting to the centre point now. And there's not a lot left in there. So I'm going to let it mingle into the middle. And then with very little left in, just drop the whole thing in. So now I hope you can see what we've got. Can you see underneath here how we've got now these really soft sort of, yeah, it is sort of caramelly, this, you know, soft caramelly bronze. And when it's combined with this, it's just gorgeous. I'm just going to assess the colour. Oh, I think that's really good. So drop it all back in the water. Beautiful, beautiful. Turn your heat up until we get to that simmering point, until we get the yarns sort of moving around but it's not rolling boil. So that yarn is now complete. We can pop it outside to cool with our first yarn. Okay, so there we go. Our gorgeous yarn is all dyed up and it's outside cooling. So we've got our yarn now, it's all ready. And before we go ahead and have a look at what we're going to be knitting this time, I just thought I'd take the opportunity just to answer a couple of questions that we've had in the past couple of weeks since the first episode went out. So one thing I'll let you know, I mean I did tell you what the gauge was on the last show, so you know, you can check your gauge, and if yours is coming out bigger or smaller, then that will give you an idea on how much of a difference it will make to the size of your blanket. However, what I'll tell you, this is my first section here. It's completed. Oh, and isn't it lovely? It was such a joy to knit. Thank you all so much for all of your messages saying how much you're enjoying it. It's just been overwhelming, to be honest, and I'm just so thrilled that there's so many of you that are taking part. But personally, from sort of my point of view, I've absolutely loved it, and I loved knitting this first section and seeing all of those little pops of the yellow and the green from that first flower from the honeysuckle. It's just gorgeous. So my first section, what I wanted to just say is just the measurement, just so if you want to just check that you're on the right tracks. I mean, this is a blanket, so it really doesn't matter, you know, if it's a bit bigger, a bit smaller. But to give you an idea, my sides here measure 18 inches. So 18 inches here and 18 inches along the bottom, because this is going to be the corner down here. So that'll give you an idea if you want to just check it against yours. I would say if you're bigger, I don't think that's particularly an issue, but if you are drastically smaller than that, it will mean that your blanket's going to come out smaller, so you might just want to have a little think about that. With everything, you know, that I'm designing, I'm always thinking of maybe issues that people might have. And one thing that can happen when you're working with two strands of yarn together is that you can miss a strand. So, you know, effectively will have just knit with one strand of yarn instead of two. Now that has happened to me once or twice, so I thought it might be useful for me just to deliberately drop a strand, and then I'll show you how you can just really easily correct that on the next row, because I always notice it. If, you know, as I'm knitting along, it's really obvious that you've missed a strand. So I'll show you how to easily correct that on the next row after you've made that error. And then the other thing I'm going to show you today is what to do with the ends. So, you know, when we go ahead and just sort of get to the knitting, you'll see exactly what I'm going to do with the yarn, because I do something slightly different. One of the main things about this blanket for me was getting the edges really neat. And to maintain the neatness of the edges, I do something just slightly different when I change colours. So I'm going to show you that, and then I will knit a few rows, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to weave in the ends so you won't see them at all on the other side. So just talking about the edges, actually, once or twice I've had a couple of people ask me if they can change the way that the increases are done. Now, you know, at the end of the day, this is your blanket and you can do whatever you want. So, I mean, you don't need my permission, if you like, to change it if you want to change it. What I will say is that if you do a different sort of increase, then that's not my design then. I mean, go ahead and do whatever you want, like I say, but I wouldn't consider that that's my design if you do change the increases and the decreases, because that's what this blanket is about. It's the type of increase that I've done and the type of decrease that I'm going to do. And that leads to just a really straight edge, because as I said on the previous show, what I wanted this blanket to look like, you know, imagine you've got a piece of garter stitch and you just cut it and the ends don't do anything. You know, they don't unravel, they don't do anything. I just wanted it to look like that, like you couldn't see the increases and the decreases. And as much as possible, I think I've achieved that. So by all means, if you want to change something, go ahead and change it, and you can, you know, join in and carry on knitting along with us, but I wouldn't consider that then to be my actual design that you're knitting. So one last thing I want to say is, although I'm not going to tell you what the finished blanket looks like, what I will say is that we do have a little bit of fancy business going on through the centre, and that's all I'm going to say at this stage. You might find either in this next section or the one after, your stitches become crowded on the 32 inch if you've started like me with a 32 inch. So whenever that happens to you, just switch your cable to the longer length cable and then carry on. Okay, so that's our blanket all ready to start knitting the second section. So the first thing we need to do is to organise our yarn. So we're all ready now to cake up our yarn. So I've got two skeins here, which is all dried. What I did was I rinsed it, gave it a lovely rinse in some wool wash, just some gentle wool wash. I'm using Eucalan at the moment, the lavender one. I really like that one actually. There's another Eucalan one that I really don't like the smell of. Is it jasmine? I'm not keen on that one. Anyway, so we rinsed it, we let it dry, and now we've got the yarn ready to cake up. So what I've done, because if you remember I dyed up two of each of the colourways, I've got the other two skeins here, so I thought I'd skein those up so you can see what they look like in the skein, and they're so pretty together. I do think this one looks a bit like fruit salad sweets. Do you remember those? Looks a bit like fruit salads, but really, really pretty. So the other two, of course, I'm going to wind into cakes, so I don't need to skein those. So I'm going to take the first one. Now, eagle-eyed people might have noticed I've got a different ball winder. I had a disaster with my, can you see this one here? This is the Knit Pro wooden one, and it's just completely stopped doing what it should do. I cannot fathom out what the problem is. So I bought a really cheap one. You can see a really cheap plastic one just from Amazon, thinking that'll tide me over until I can sort out what's going on with the other one. But actually I've used it a few times and I'm really quite impressed with it. It was £20 from Amazon and it's by this company, Lamb XD, and it comes with a little bag and, you know, so I'm just going with it for the moment. We'll see how long it lasts. Right, so I've got my first skein. Okay, so I'm going to pop it over my Swift, making sure I haven't twisted the skein, and hope my Swift doesn't act up, and that's okay. And now we're going to take off the ties, and I'm going to try this time to take off the ones that aren't holding it together first. But it is sometimes quite difficult to tell, just depending on how... You see, I've done it again. That's the one that's holding everything together. They don't look like they used to. I don't know if they've been, you know, started to be tied up differently. They kind of look just like the other ties, but it doesn't matter. It's all fine. Right. What you will always have is you will have a strand that's coming from the outside of the skein and then one that's on the inside, and you want to grab the one that's coming from the outside and that moves freely like that from the skein, and that's good. So through the little guide eye thingy there, jam it into that slot on the top, and then I'm going to just hold on to the metal guidey thing here as we wind. There we go, and we're away. Right, that last bit's just got itself tangled. That's fine. There we go. Oh, this looks so pretty caked up. And what I do, the yarn that was in the centre there, that was jammed in the little gap, I just put my finger on it so that ends up in the centre of the skein. And there we go. It actually winds a cake. I've never had a cake that looks like this. And I was thrilled when it came off, when I wound my first one on it, because I've always wanted a ball winder that produced a cake with these cool triangular little gaps in it. Can you see how pretty that is? And that tonal, doesn't that look just gorgeous, caked up? So I'm going to wind this speckled one as well, and then we can get to the knitting. Okay, so we've got our two lovely 50-gram cakes all wound up and ready to go. I can't wait to see what these look like together. So we're ready now to carry on with our blanket. So section 2, we are continuing in exactly the same way as we did for section 1. So all of section 2, we're carrying on with the increases just the same way, and you want to carry on doing those increases until you've got 166 stitches. So 166 is the number that you are going to for section 2. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to cut our previous 2 yarns. Now you will have little leftovers from each of your sections. Section 1 does have a little bit more left over, because we're starting from nothing and working out, so you use a little bit less yarn. So I've got about, I think, 13-14 grams of each colour left in section 1. So we're going to cut those off, and you want to leave a tail of maybe 8 inches. So we're finished with those now, and you can pop those into some scrappy projects. So every time we change colour, we are not going to start right with that first stitch. We're going to knit a few stitches first. So I've got my yarns here ready. Let me just pull out some yarn out of those. So get your yarn ready. There we go, holding double. There, we're all set. So the first thing we're going to do still with our old yarn, with section 1 yarn, is we're going to knit 4 stitches. And we'll be doing this every time we change colour. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. And now we can pick up our new colour, so just drop that one, you're done with it. Pick up our new colour and leave a tail of, what's that, 5-6 inches, just for weaving in. Loop it over and just start knitting. Make sure when you knit that second stitch you don't grab your tail end. And just carry on. So I'm going to knit to the last stitch and knit from back for every row. And I'll carry on doing this until I've got 166 stitches. I'm going to now work just a few rows, and like I said, I'm going to deliberately make a mistake on that last row, and then I will show you how to correct that and also how to weave in your ends. Okay, so I've worked to a point here where I've deliberately made that mistake that I've mentioned. So if you look at this stitch here, there's only one strand on my needle, so I've only knit with one strand as I've got to that stitch there, and the other strand you can see is hanging below there. It's really easy to fix, so let's just do one more stitch to get to the actual stitch where the problem is. So you can see, I'll just bring in a little needle to point, here's the strand that we've missed, just hanging there. It's really obvious because you think, oh, what's that? And that's the strand we've missed. So what I do is, basically what we need to do is to get this strand up on the needle. So if you sort of loosen off your stitch a little bit there, and then I sort of go down with my right hand needle. Hang on, let me just rearrange myself a little bit. So loosen off the stitch here and then go down underneath it. So I'm now underneath it, and then sort of loop your needle around the strand. There we go, I've got it. Pop it back up on the needle and then just have a look at it, because it's likely twisted and you can see that that's not lying correctly. So then you can just rearrange it. So that's now in the right orientation, and now we can just knit it as it should have been. So that's how to correct that really common mistake, and I'm now going to show you how to weave in your ends. Okay, so we've got our two ends here, and you can see the reason why I've done this is because our edge remains perfectly neat and tidy, and our ends are just a little bit of a distance in, so we can weave them in. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sort of separate your two, I'm calling them two ends. I know there's four effectively, but let's just call them two. And the first thing I'm going to do is close up this gap. You can see you always have a little hole when you've rejoined like old and new yarn. So take one set of your ends here, oops, just thread it onto a tapestry needle and have a look across at the other stitch where the other set of ends are coming out, and I'm going to put my tapestry needle through that stitch where those ends are emerging from. Don't pull it all the way, keep it loose like that, and then grab your other end and do the same thing. Go underneath where this one's coming out. That's why I didn't tighten it up, just so that it's easy to see which stitch it's coming out of. Go underneath that, and now you can pull them both tight. So pull that one and pull that one, and when I say tight, you just want to pull them so that when you look at it, it just looks like the rest of your fabric. There'll be, you know, there's an extra bit of fabric going on there, but essentially you can't really see it. And what we've done by crossing them over like that is we've closed the gap. So now we can go ahead and weave in our ends. So I'm going to weave in this colour on the correct colour down here, and this one up here. With the green yarn, I'm going to first of all just work down to a little bit of real estate, a little bit of real estate of this green colour. So I kind of go through two legs and two legs down like that, and that just gets me into the right area. I need to go down one more actually, so just find that leg, go down and down, right, there we go. And now we're in the right area to weave in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of follow the yarn around here. So I'm going to go round and up through that sort of, what's that, like a little umbrella, up through that one, and then up through the one that looks like a little smile. So you're kind of at an angle, can you see, like that? And pull through. And as you pull through, don't, you know, do it quite gently. You want to sort of have a look at it and think, can I see that? No, I can't. I'm good to carry on. And again, follow that stitch around, and this time we're going to go down through the sort of smiley thing and down through the little umbrella shape, again at that angle. Same thing, pull it through at a tension where you can't see it, and just carry on in that way for maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 stitches, I guess, until you feel like you've secured those yarns. And if you weave your ends in as you go, it's really not traumatic. You know, it might take you 5 minutes each time. Can you see how we can hardly see it, really? When you trim your ends, I won't trim this just yet because I'm going to weave it in a bit more, but when you trim them, don't go really close to the fabric here. Leave a little bit of fabric like this, because inevitably what happens is everything moves around and that yarn gets sucked in, and if you cut it way down near the fabric here, it can poke through the other side. So leave a bit of a tail like that, trim it, and then when your blanket's completely finished, you know, if you want to wash and block it or spray block it or whatever you're going to do, that's fine, and then you can do a final trim right at the end. So this one I'm going to do exactly the same. I'll start it off, and then, I mean, you know what to do now, don't you? So with this one, we're going up into this, the new colour, which, doesn't it look just lovely? I'm loving it. So again, I'm just going to get a little bit sort of further up into the fabric so I'm in the right area. I'm going to go up one more. And then same thing, so we're going to follow that around, and then we're going to go down and down at an angle, and then follow it around and go up and up in exactly the same way. So then you can just carry on weaving in as we did for the first colour. So there we go, that's everything you need to know to get on knitting your section 2 of my favourite blanket. I'm so excited. I've actually knit a few rows just so that I could show you those couple of things, and the colours are just looking gorgeous. I hope you can see all these little specks, the little bright specks of that magenta and the purple. Oh, it looks so nice. So I'm now going to just sit here. I might make myself a little cup of tea, I think that would be lovely, and I'm going to have a little knit on my blanket, and I will see you back next month. You've now got, you know, we've had a shorter amount of time this time with the first and the second episode, but now you've got a month. So if you didn't start your blanket, you've got plenty of time to now get caught up, ready for the next episode. So I will see you next month for more My Favourite Blanket.